The mysterious illness. Amina was a young woman with a heart full of faith. Known for her devotion, she spent most of her days serving in her local church, volunteering tirelessly to help others and dedicating herself to prayer. Her warm smile and unwavering belief inspired those around her. However, her life took a dark turn when she started feeling unwell. It began subtly: fatigue after simple tasks, a faint dizziness every now and then. But soon, Amina's health deteriorated rapidly. She experienced frequent fainting spells, bouts of weakness that left her bedridden, and vivid nightmares that haunted her sleep. Worried for her well-being, Amina visited several hospitals, undergoing endless tests and scans. Doctors reassured her that everything was fine, but she knew something was deeply wrong. The confusion and fear grew with each passing day, as her condition worsened without any explanation. Determined to find solace, Amina turned to her faith. Night after night, she knelt at the church's altar, pouring out her heart in desperate prayers, begging for healing and guidance. Yet, it seemed as though her words were lost in the void. Her health continued to decline, and her frustration mounted. One fateful evening, exhausted and at her breaking point, Amina collapsed at the altar. Tears streamed down her face as she whispered one final plea to God before darkness enveloped her. In that moment, she drifted into a strange and vivid dream, a dream unlike anything she had ever experienced before. The dream would mark the beginning of a revelation that would change everything Amina thought she knew. The dream of truth. Amina drifted into unconsciousness, but instead of darkness, she found herself standing in a radiant white room. The air was calm, filled with an indescribable peace, yet she felt a sense of urgency. The walls shimmered as though made of pure light, and the faint sound of a distant melody echoed softly. In the center of the room stood a figure cloaked in white robes, radiating an aura of purity and wisdom. The figure's face was obscured, but its voice was clear and steady. Amina, it called gently, yet with undeniable authority. Startled, Amina stepped forward. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I am a messenger sent to you," the figure replied. "I have heard your cries and seen your suffering. But the altar where you pray does not belong to the God you serve. It has been corrupted." Amina's breath caught in her throat. "What do you mean? How can that be? The church you serve is tied to a dark force. The prayers you offer there are intercepted, and the illness consuming you is the result of your exposure to this corrupted altar." Tears welled up in Amina's eyes. "No, that can't be true. I've given everything to this church. You must open your eyes and see the truth. If you wish to be free, seek wisdom and walk away from what does not serve the light," the figure said firmly. Before Amina could ask more, the figure vanished, and she awoke with a jolt. Her body was drenched in sweat, her heart pounding. The words from the dream echoed in her mind, leaving her overwhelmed with disbelief. Determined to find answers, Amina decided to observe the church and its pastor, Pastor Daniel, more closely. She noticed peculiar rituals during services, subtle hand gestures, murmured words she couldn't understand, and practices that felt out of place. Pastor Daniel's sermons, once uplifting, began to strike her as hollow and contradictory. Amina's heart felt torn. This was the church that had nurtured her faith, the community she had called home. Yet, the warnings from her dream haunted her. Was she being deceived, or was her dream a divine message? As doubt and fear consumed her, Amina realized she needed to seek the truth, no matter how painful it might be, the pastor's secret. The unease in Amina's heart grew with every passing day. Determined to uncover the truth, she began paying closer attention to Pastor Bale's actions. At first, nothing seemed out of place, but one night, long after the congregation had gone home, Amina stayed behind, pretending to clean. As she made her way to the rear of the church, she overheard raised voices coming from Pastor Bale's office. Curiosity got the better of her. Quietly, she pressed her ear against the door and listened. "You promised results, Beo," a deep, gravelly voice growled. "The pact requires constant sacrifices, and you're falling behind." "I've done everything you asked," Pastor Beo replied, his tone filled with desperation. "The congregation is thriving. Miracles are happening. What more do you want from me?" "More souls, Beo. The whisperer does not care about your excuses. Fail again, and the price will be higher than you can pay." Amina's blood ran cold. The words she heard confirmed her worst fears. The church's prosperity and miracles weren't acts of divine grace but the result of a sinister pact. Her heart ached at the realization that the man she had once respected had sold his soul and his congregation to a mysterious entity. Unable to contain herself, Amina pushed the door open. "Pastor Beo, what are you doing?" she demanded, her voice shaking with both fear and anger. Pastor Beo froze, his face pale with shock. "Amina, you shouldn't be here." His tone turned dark. "You don't understand what you've just heard." "I understand enough," she shot back. "You've betrayed everything this church is supposed to stand for. How could you?" His expression hardened, and the warmth he once showed her vanished. "You have no idea what you're meddling in, Amina. Stay out of this, or you'll regret it." Fear gripped her as she realized the man standing before her was no longer the kind-hearted pastor she once knew. Without another word, she backed out of the room and fled into the night, tears streaming down her face. When she arrived home, Amina locked the doors and collapsed onto her knees, her body trembling. She began to pray, not at an altar but in the privacy of her home, seeking clarity and protection. For the first time in weeks, her heart felt lighter as she distanced herself from the church's influence. Over the next few days, her health began to improve. The nightmares stopped, and her strength started to return. Though the road ahead was uncertain, Amina resolved to break free from the dark forces that had entangled her life. No matter the cost, the curse unravels. In the days that followed her escape from the church, Amina began to notice something remarkable. Her health was slowly improving. The fainting spell stopped, her strength returned, and the nightmares that had plagued her for weeks disappeared entirely. She couldn't ignore the realization that her illness had been directly tied to the corrupted altar. While Amina found peace, Pastor Beo's world began to crumble. In the spiritual realm, the whisperer, an ominous, shadowy entity with an unsettling voice, convened with him in a grim meeting. "You have failed me, Beo," the whisperer hissed, its voice echoing through the dark void. "Amina has escaped, and her prayers now grow stronger. You must bring her back, or the pact will be broken." Pastor Beo trembled before the entity. "I've done everything you asked. I just need more time." The whisperer's hollow laugh filled the air. "Time? You dare ask for time? Your church thrives on what I have given you, power, miracles, and wealth. If you cannot deliver what I demand, I will take everything back, starting with you." Back in the physical realm, Pastor Beo was haunted by the weight of his mistakes. He realized that he had become a prisoner of the pact he had entered to grow his congregation. The church's success was a facade built on darkness, and now the very forces that had given him power were demanding a price he could no longer pay. In desperation, Pastor Beo turned to the unthinkable. One night, he called his most loyal assistant, Brother Emmanuel, to the church for a special task. Emmanuel, unaware of Beo's true nature, followed without question. The ritual that followed was gruesome and heart-wrenching. Pastor Beo, with trembling hands, carried out the dark sacrifice, hoping it would appease the whisperer. The room was filled with the stench of burning herbs and the eerie chants of incantations. As the ritual reached its climax, Pastor Beo's fear grew. He knew he was crossing a line from which there was no return. When the deed was done, the whisperer appeared again, its form more menacing than ever. Pathetic, it sneered. You think one soul will make up for your failure? Amina grew stronger every day, and your hold over the church weakens. If you cannot deliver her, your own life will be the next sacrifice. Pastor Beo collapsed to the ground, his body racked with despair. The weight of his choices pressed heavily on him, and for the first time, he regretted ever making the pact. But regret would not save him now. He was trapped, his soul bound to a deal he could no longer control. The curse had begun to unravel, and Pastor Beo knew that the doom the whisperer promised was drawing nearer. Amina's freedom came at the cost of his descent into darkness, and the battle between light and shadow was far from over. The awakening. Amina's newfound peace was short-lived. One night, as she slept, she was transported into another vivid dream. She found herself back in the glowing white room, the serene light calming her troubled heart. The mysterious figure in white awaited her, standing tall and resolute. You have taken the first step, Amina, the figure said, its voice both gentle and commanding. But the darkness will not release its hold on you easily. You must seek help from one who walks firmly in the light. Who should I turn to? Amina asked, her voice filled with desperation. There is one who can guide you, Elder Malachi. Seek him out. He is a true servant of the Most High, and his faith will strengthen yours. Together, you will confront the darkness and break the chains that bind you. When Amina awoke, the dream's clarity left no room for doubt. She had heard of Elder Malachi, an old and wise man renowned for his unshakable faith and healing prayers. The very next day, she set out on her journey to find him, her heart both nervous and hopeful. Elder Malachi lived in a modest home nestled on the outskirts of a small village. When Amina arrived, the elder greeted her warmly, his presence radiating peace and wisdom. She poured out her story, from the mysterious illness to the horrifying truth about her church and Pastor Beo. Elder Malachi listened intently, nodding as she spoke. You were right to leave that place, child, he said. The altar you prayed at was indeed corrupted, and your illness was a consequence of your exposure to it. But fear not, the light is stronger than the darkness, and you are not alone in this fight. Encouraged by his words, Amina agreed to join Elder Malachi in a series of intense prayers and fasting to break the spiritual bond tied to her. For several days, they prayed fervently, calling on divine strength to shield her from the forces that sought to reclaim her. But the darkness did not retreat without a fight. During this period, Amina experienced terrifying spiritual attacks. Each night, her dreams were invaded by shadowy figures whispering threats. She saw visions of snakes slithering around her bed and felt phantom hands gripping her throat as she tried to sleep. The attacks extended into the physical world as well. Objects in her home moved on their own, and chilling winds swept through her room despite closed windows. One night, she awoke to a deafening roar and saw dark shapes circling her, their forms melting into shadows when she called out to God. Though shaken, Amina refused to give up. With Elder Malachi's guidance, her faith grew stronger. Each attack was met with fervent prayers, and with every prayer, the darkness weakened. She could feel the spiritual bond loosening, and though the battle was grueling, she was determined to see it through. The forces that sought to silence her realized they had underestimated her resolve. What began as fear in Amina's heart was transforming into unwavering courage, and she knew she was closer than ever to breaking free, the battle for the truth. Pastor Beo sat in his once thriving church, now nearly empty. The pews, once filled with eager worshippers, were silent and abandoned. His congregation had dwindled, whispers of his deteriorating health spreading like wildfire. His skin was pale, his hands trembled, and his once booming voice was now a raspy shadow of itself. The effects of the whisperer's looming judgment were beginning to show. Late one night, the whisperer appeared in his dreams, its shadowy figure more menacing than ever. You failed me, Beo, it hissed. The altar is losing its power, the congregation is leaving, and Amina is beyond your reach. You've broken the pact, and now, your life is the price. No, please. Pastor Beo begged, falling to his knees. Give me another chance. I can fix this. The whisperer's laughter echoed through the void. There is no fixing this. You have one last chance to redeem yourself. Stop her, or the darkness will consume you entirely. Meanwhile, Amina, guided by Elder Malachi, prepared herself for the final confrontation. Her faith was stronger than ever, and the days of prayer and fasting had emboldened her spirit. The time had come to return to the church and destroy the corrupt altar. On the day of the confrontation, the church felt different. The air was heavy with an oppressive force, and an unnatural chill filled the sanctuary. Amina and Elder Malachi entered with purpose, their prayers already beginning as they approached the altar. Pastor Beo, visibly weakened, staggered toward them. You can't do this, he rasped. If you destroy the altar, I'll lose everything, and so will you. You don't understand the power you're dealing with. Amina met his gaze with unwavering determination. I understand more than you think, Pastor. This altar is a gateway to darkness, and it has no place here. It's time to end this. Desperate, Pastor Beo lunged at her, but his movements were sluggish and clumsy. The guilt and fear that consumed him sapped his strength, and Amina easily avoided him. Elder Malachi stepped forward, his voice thundering with authority as he began to pray. The atmosphere grew tense as the spiritual battle intensified. Shadows writhed and twisted around the altar, forming grotesque shapes that lashed out at Amina and Malachi. The whisperer's voice boomed through the church, its anger palpable. You dare defy me? You are nothing but dust before my power. But Amina stood firm, her voice rising above the chaos as she prayed fervently. The light of truth will always overpower the darkness. You have no authority here. The battle reached its peak as Amina placed her hands on the altar and prayed with every ounce of faith she had. A brilliant light erupted from her, filling the church and driving the shadows back. The whisperer screamed in rage as the altar cracked and crumbled into dust, its dark energy dissipating into nothingness. Pastor Beo fell to the ground, clutching his chest as the darkness released its hold on him. Tears streamed down his face as he realized the full weight of his actions. I was wrong, he whispered. I was so wrong. The church, now bathed in light, felt lighter and free. The oppressive air was gone, replaced by a sense of peace and renewal. Amina, exhausted but victorious, knelt in prayer, thanking God for his strength. The battle was over, and the truth had prevailed. But Amina knew this was just the beginning of her journey to rebuild her faith and help others see the light. The corrupt altar was destroyed, and with it, the chains that had bound her, and so many others, were broken forever. Redemption and reflection. The following Sunday, Pastor Beo, frail and trembling, stood before the remnants of his congregation. The once vibrant church was now nearly empty, the vibrant energy replaced with an eerie silence. Those who remained sat in uneasy anticipation as Pastor Beo walked to the pulpit, his head hung low. With tears streaming down his face, he began to speak. I have sinned, he said, his voice weak but clear. I have deceived you all. The altar I called holy was corrupted. The miracles, the prosperity, the growth of this church, they were not from God but from a dark pact I made with an entity known as the Whisperer. Gasps and murmurs filled the sanctuary, but Pastor Beo pressed on. I was a man of faith once. I started this church with good intentions, but I allowed greed and ambition to lead me astray. I sold my soul, and in doing so, I led you down a path of darkness. For that, I am deeply sorry. The weight of his confession shocked the congregation. Some wept openly, others shook their heads in disbelief, while a few quietly walked out. By the end of his confession, the remaining members rose from their seats and left the church, their trust shattered. The building, once a place of worship, now stood as a hollow reminder of misplaced faith. Meanwhile, Amina's journey had only just begun. News of her testimony spread far and wide, and people sought her out for guidance and encouragement. She became a beacon of hope, sharing her story and urging others to seek God directly. Faith is not in buildings or titles, she would say. True faith is found in a personal connection with God, guided by truth and discernment. Despite his confession, Pastor Beo's guilt consumed him. He fell gravely ill, his body ravaged by the spiritual and physical toll of his sins. Alone in his empty home, he awaited the judgment he believed he deserved. But Amina, moved by compassion, paid him a visit. She found him lying in bed, his once proud figure now frail and broken. Kneeling beside him, she took his hand and said, "You've confessed your sins, Pastor. Now it's time to ask for forgiveness. God's mercy is greater than your mistakes, but you must repent sincerely." Through tears, Pastor Beo whispered a heartfelt prayer, pleading for forgiveness and a chance to make amends. As he finished, a sense of peace washed over him. Though his health remained fragile, he felt a spark of hope, his soul no longer burdened by the chains of darkness. The story concluded with a powerful message. Amina's unwavering faith and courage had not only saved her but had also exposed the dangers of blindly following institutions without discernment. Pastor Beo's downfall served as a sobering reminder that even spiritual leaders are susceptible to corruption. As Amina continued her mission of spreading hope, she left people with these words: "Test everything. Hold on to what is good." True faith requires vigilance, wisdom, and a heart open to the truth. Never let your loyalty to a person or place replace your loyalty to God. And so, the legacy of her story lived on, a reminder of light's power over darkness and the strength of faith rooted in truth. As Amina's influence grew, her testimony began to ripple through communities far beyond her own. She was invited to speak at gatherings, churches, and community centers, where her story served as a cautionary tale about the dangers of misplaced faith and the importance of discernment. People listened intently as she recounted her journey, from her illness and despair to her spiritual awakening and the battle that broke the chains of darkness. She encouraged people to read their scriptures, pray with sincerity, and ask questions rather than blindly following leaders who might exploit their faith. Faith, she would say, is not blind allegiance to a person or a place. It is a relationship with God, a truth that no man, no ritual, and no institution can replace. In the months that followed, many of the former members of Pastor Beo's church found new spiritual homes. Some rediscovered their faith, strengthened by the lessons learned from Amina's journey, while others chose to explore different paths, seeking God in their own unique ways. Amina's message of hope and truth became a lifeline for those who had once been lost in the shadows of deception. As for Pastor Beo, his journey of redemption was long and arduous. Though his health remained fragile, he began to devote what remained of his life to atoning for his sins. He reached out to those he had hurt, seeking forgiveness and offering to help them rebuild their faith. Under Amina's guidance, he became a quiet but earnest advocate for truth and repentance. The old church building, once a symbol of corruption, was abandoned. But rather than allowing it to stand as a dark monument to its past, Amina worked with Elder Malachi and a few other community leaders to transform it into a community center, a place where people could come together, not for worship, but for education, fellowship, and healing. It became a space where stories were shared, resources were provided, and people learned to empower themselves spiritually and emotionally. 1 year after the altar was destroyed, Amina stood on the steps of the repurposed building, now bustling with life and hope. A plaque by the entrance bore an inscription she had chosen herself: "The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it." As she looked out over the crowd of people gathered there, she felt a deep sense of peace. Her journey had been painful, but it had also been transformative, not just for her but for everyone who had been touched by her story. In the end, Amina's life became a testament to the power of faith, courage, and truth. She had faced the darkness, overcome it, and emerged as a beacon of hope for others. Her story reminded all who heard it that while darkness may cast its shadow, the light will always prevail. And with that light, even the most broken among us can find redemption.